Chapter 13. A Ring for Amy. While everyone was caring for Beth, Amy was having a difficult time at Aunt March's. Aunt March watched over everything Amy did. As the days passed, Amy felt more and more like a helpless fly caught in the web of a very strict spider. In addition to Amy's many chores, Aunt March also insisted Amy read aloud to her every day after dinner. If it hadn't been for Laurie's daily visit and Aunt March's old maid, Esther, Amy felt she could not have gotten through the dreadful ordeal. Esther befriended Amy and let her examine all the pretty things in Aunt March's house. The big wardrobes, the ancient chests, and many cabinets full of interesting things such as velvet cushions and jewelry. "I wonder where all these pretty things will go when Aunt March dies," Amy said to Esther one day as she examined one of her aunt's jewel cases. "To you and your sisters, Esther replied. "It is in her will." "How nice," Amy said, "but I wish she'd let us have them now." Esther shook her head. "It is too soon, Amy, but I happen to know that the little turquoise ring will be given to you when you go home." Amy's eyes widened. "Do you think so?" she asked excitedly. "It'll be very good if only I can have that ring. I do like Aunt March after all," she added. From that day on, Amy was a model of obedience. She was very excited about the turquoise ring and imagined how grand she'd look wearing it on her finger. But when Laurie had come and said that Beth was in danger, Amy closed her eyes and prayed for her sister. As her heart ached, she felt that a million turquoise rings would not make up for losing a sister. When Beth finally woke from her long sleep, the first person she saw was her mother. Too weak to speak, all she could do was smile before falling back asleep. Meg and Joe listened to the news about Father and Mr. Brooke as they and Mrs. March sat by Beth's bedside. Laurie went off to keep Amy posted of Beth's condition, but he fell asleep on Aunt March's sofa after the tiresome night and didn't wake until he heard Amy's shouts. "Mari!" Amy cried joyfully at the sight of her mother. As Amy and her mother sat talking, Mrs. March noticed the turquoise ring on her daughter's finger. "Aunt March gave me the ring today," Amy explained. "I'd like to wear it to remind me not to be selfish. Beth isn't selfish, so I'm going to try and be like Beth. May I?" "Wear your ring, dear," Mrs. March replied, "and do your best. Now I must get back to Beth. We will soon have you home again, little daughter." That evening, Joe slipped into Beth's room and found her mother. "I want to tell you something, Mother," she said seriously. "What is it, dear?" Mrs. March asked, holding out her hand to Joe. "Is it about Meg?" Joe nodded, surprised how her mother had guessed. She sat down at her mother's feet and began to explain. "Last summer, Meg left a pair of gloves at the Lawrences, and only one was returned. We'd forgotten all about it until Teddy told me that Mr. Brooke had it. Teddy saw it and teased him about it. Then Mr. Brooke confessed to Teddy that he liked Meg but was afraid to say anything because he was so young and poor. Do you think Meg cares for John?" Mrs. March asked. "Who?" Joe asked in confusion. "Mr. Brooke. Your father and I call him John now. He's been very devoted to us since we've been in Washington. He was very open about his feelings for Meg. He told us he wanted to marry her. He is truly an excellent young man, but I will not consent to Meg marrying so young. But don't say anything to Meg," Mrs. March added. "I don't know whether she loves John yet. I will be able to judge better when I see them together." Joe wasn't very happy with this new information. Her worst fears were coming true. Meg and John were in love, and he would soon marry her and take her away from the family. "Meg is only 17, Mrs. March said. "Your father and I have agreed that Meg shall not marry until she's 20. If she and John truly love each other, they can wait."